Well, most people don't try that. But I see schools that really educate people in terms of the environment. They don't try to twist their wrist and get them to be obedient. They say these people want to be alone. But until they're educated to accept all people and judge each person on the basis of individual merit, which I think is very easy to inculcate in people, to judge them on the basis of individual merit. If only Swedes existed, there will be Swedes that find fault with other Swedes, depending on your orientation. And there are Jews that find fault with Jews. I read recently of Jewish aviators in Israel that have dropped their bombs at sea because they didn't want to drop it on the Palestinians. Of course, if they're caught doing that, they go to jail. But there are many people that learned how to express themselves without making it public if it's dangerous. It's the law in Israel. When you're given bombs, you use them to destroy the enemy. In the United States, if a guy waits his machine gun bullets up in the air, and if they catch him doing that, he may go to jail. He's broken the law. What law? The law of killing people. Well, he himself feels that he doesn't want to do that, but the government cannot afford to give him a gun and let him do what he wants with it. If you just shoot people in the army you don't like, it's just like shooting your enemy, isn't it? But that's against the law. You might go before a firing squad if the army finds that you did that. But if you shoot a guy in the back while you're running into a battlefield, they may not detect that. I'm sure there are a lot of perfect crimes committed in the army and other places. Even if the majority of people say that he should be executed, remember that's their value system, which they picked up from their culture. Live and let live. What the hell does that mean? Well, does it mean no war? You've heard that expression, live and let live. Well, I asked religious people about mosquitoes, and they said they're made by Satan, mosquitoes, all rats and things like that, so you can kill them. They have to have an answer to those things. Otherwise people get confused. But in India, you're not supposed to kill anything. You're not supposed to kill a bug, a fly, a mosquito, because all life is sacred. And some cultures believe that people come back as rats, and they have to live out their lives. If you kill a rat, you're killing or making the karma bad for the person and yourself. And if you believe you're put on earth to suffer, if you get them very young, and every time they bang their knee, they say, boy, I'm paying off my karma. You know what I mean? So you make people accept miserable situations. I would say that was the original intent of law, to get the masses of people to accept the limitations superimposed upon them as being the result of their own misbehavior. You deserve what you get. You ever hear that? You deserve what you get. So if you can convince people that all the misery that befalls you, you're paying off your karma, well, that's not bad. You don't have to have too many policemen out there either. So you got to remember that law is a practice based on scarcity, to take care of the in-group as a rule. I noticed recently that a very important person was accused of rape, and he hired the best attorneys. Well, he also wanted to head for France right away. He wanted to get out of the country, so he couldn't be put in jail. But they stopped him. So using that example sometimes says to people, everybody is subject to justice under the law. But there are a lot of people that can afford an attorney who can look up the person that claimed he raped. And they could say, well, didn't you once claim that once before in another court? Or make her look like a cheap prostitute. You know what I mean? If you have a good enough attorney, he can take anything anybody says and twist it around. Do you understand? And if you can afford only a mediocre attorney, you might wind up 2 years in jail. If you can afford a good attorney, you might get 2 weeks probation, a month probation. So attorneys must understand by that alone they are corrupt. If you can hire a better attorney than I can, you are corrupt. So's the attorney for defending you. If he was honest, he'd say, the other attorney, you got a point there. I can't disagree with you. If attorneys were honest, right? Yeah. Well, it's very hard to take a famous person and put him in a bad light. If lots of people have learned, I hate to use the word, to love him or concerned about him. They would rather, in the Deep South, I remember, a man would get up in court and say, you're going to take a nigger's word against a white man's word? If the black man claimed he was mistreated, the white man would say, are you going to take a nigger's word against a white man's word? To the judge. If you want to be elected next year? So a lot of people figured blacks lie. They have to sustain their bigotry. And also, if you owned a grocery store and you fought for the underhanded, you fought for the underprivileged, people may not go to your drugstore if it's a racial community. If you took care of a black man and say, I think he's telling the truth, and the majority disagreed with you, they will boycott your store. Do you understand that? That's why conformity is almost forced. Does that make sense? Conformity is forced because they can take away your livelihood, put you in jail, build up Trump charges against you. It's very hard to sell German war bombs in America during the war. Almost impossible. In fact, you'd be picked up sooner or later if you even tried it. When I say that people cannot communicate with each other, I'm referring to the fact that if 10 Afro-Americans went to a Klan meeting to try to give them their point of view, they could not convince them. If the Jews went to a Nazi meeting to try to get them to understand live and let live, they would not succeed at a Nazi meeting. And no matter how well they use their language, it would not be understood in the same way. That's why I keep saying language is subject to interpretation and has a lot to do with your background and the prejudices built in. So it's very hard for man to be free. That would mean no environmental influence. Do you know anybody like that? I've never met a person that wasn't influenced. They wouldn't even be able to speak if they had no influence. They said, me don't understand language, that's all. They'd say in any language, me don't understand. But to have convictions or a set of values mean you come from a given culture or a subculture, or you've been influenced by a few people. Now, books that were written, I'm using old language, ahead of their time, did not build a big following. Even if you wrote a book on evolution, it might be a bestseller amongst scientists, but not amongst the religious right. Do you understand? And if most people go to church, it could never be a bestseller. If you believe in doing the right thing, if you've got such a concept in your head as the right thing, I don't know what the right thing means. I think a very good example of that is, I don't know how much George Bernard Shaw really understood that, but in the film that he did, his son comes back from college. He says, now that you're a college graduate, son, what do you want to do with your life? He says, I want to go into politics. He said, well, you don't have any experience in life. You just got out of school. He said, I know the difference between right and wrong. He says, you know that? The thing that baffled the philosophers all through the centuries? You know that? He said, yes, then you belong in politics. There is no right or wrong. They're just different laws different nations make. It's a law to feed Christians to lions. It's a law to put a guy in jail if he tries to steal food from a supermarket without paying for it. The law upholds the institutions. It has to. If it didn't, the institutions would collapse. So, are the laws made for human welfare, human betterment? Not necessarily. Some are, some aren't. When a person is put in jail, it should be the law that he's trained and given a profession whereby he can earn a living. Any person in jail should be given a profession. And when he passes a test to carry out that profession, he's then free. He's given a chance. But if he's just put in jail for 20 years, I wouldn't say that does anything but build resentment. Or he might say, I guess I'm just a natural-born criminal, if they convince him of that, which they do. In court of law, they do say, you're a criminal, you've been in jail ever since you were a kid, you've been in juvenile hall, then later on, you went back to juvenile hall, then you spent 3 years in state penitentiary, you're a goddamn incurable criminal. That's the decisions that people come to. To me, there are no criminals except the government would be criminal, and the military would be accused of being assassins. But I would send them back to school so they wouldn't want to kill anybody anymore. But I wouldn't kill them. That's a question somebody once put to me. If somebody murdered your daughter and cut her up into pieces, what would you do then? I would try to help them in whatever way I can, because I see them as being victims of culture. Now,